Have you ever had one of those days where you figure you must be living right because something works out? Those don't happen very often, but I just had one. Check out the door fitment against the quarter panel that I'm replacing on this car. The gap is almost perfectly symmetrical from top to bottom, and while I haven't measured it, to me it looks really good. And considering that I really didn't do anything to make that happen, I mounted the quarter panel on with a bunch of sheet metal screws, closed the door, and there it was. The contour of the door is lined up with the contour of the quarter panel. The gap at the door seam is symmetrical from top to bottom. I can only credit this to some kind of miracle. Because let me tell you, what you're looking at is a result of about infinity work. I don't even know how to, I really don't even know how to count the number of hours and the amount of effort that goes into getting the car to this point. Those of you that have done this before, mad props to you. I'm kind of on a discovery course and want to do it right, and so I'm taking it really slow, which means that I spend about an hour working and then I spend about 10 hours thinking and studying and figuring things out, and then I work for an hour and study for 10 hours. Also, can I just tell you, I have no idea how you do this without putting the car up on a rotisserie or on a jig or something. Doing this while the car's put together is borderline impossible. And the only reason I think I'm able to even get to this point is because I've got a bare frame body to work with. I can access the car from just about any point and any angle and cut and grind and sand and drill and pull things apart, and it's still a ginormous pain in my keister. Look, for the record, I asked for this. I wanted to do this. I actually had some cars available that I looked at where all of this work was done, and I wanted to start with something that needed a little bit more of this. Be careful what you ask for. It's a lot of work. Anyway, I'm excited to have this on there. I am going to do some welding on it. And then I got to turn my attention to the other side. Now here's the trick. Unless you've got the car on a well-structured jig with some amazing reinforcements, you really don't want to take too many pieces of the car off at any one time. So I pulled quarter panel, then from there I pulled wheel housings, I put wheel housings back on, and now I'm putting quarter panel back on, in spite of the fact that I'd like to replace a bunch of this sheet metal through here as well. Certainly the trunk floor, the tail panel, as well as the deck lid, shroud, cowl component right there. All of that's going to be replaced. So eventually that all comes off, but I don't want to do it yet because I want those pieces in place as reference points for this quarter panel. And I want them in place so that I maintain as much rigidity and strength in the car as I can while it's up here on the rotisserie. Let's turn it around. I've actually seen some guys that do this by leaving the sail panel in place. So instead of separating it at the original joint, incision is made through here, and large chunks of the original quarter panel can then be left up against the door jamb, for example, where things are sensitive, and even across here by the tail panel. Interestingly, I did a Gen 5 Camaro that way for slightly different reasons. I didn't want to remove the glass. I didn't want to deal with the airbag on the inside of the car. And this part was all in really good shape. And so I made that same seam across the top here, and I think it worked great. It's probably actually more work because that seam requires so much attention and then smoothing and welding and grinding and welding and grinding in multiple passes. Frankly, in this case, I don't really see a good reason to do that. Although this up here is in reasonably good condition. I have severe dents here, major problems right there. So I know it needs to come at least to the door seam anyway. Clearly right around the wheelhouse needs to come out because this is just completely rusted out. There must be some advantage to doing it the other way. I did it that way once. And some of the other guys restoring these cars are doing it that way. So I'd be curious to know from you, if you know, why would one opt to do it that way, right? Is there some real strong inherent benefit to leaving the existing sail panel? Or is it generally better to replace the whole thing? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other? I don't know. Let me know. I get most of my grinding discs from the Harbor Freight, and usually they're fine. But I gotta tell you, the last round I bought, Bauer brand, absolute garbage. I've made exactly 2 cuts with this one. That's what's left. Don't buy the Bauer ones. All kinds of treasures. One cut. That was 1 cut. Gone. Unbelievable. The mini tub is 2.5 inches wider than the standard tub. And I'll start by making a mark at the 2.5 inch point. I may or may not cut right there. It depends on whether we want to leave a flange. And I actually don't know if it matters for the most part because the floor pan for the trunk is being replaced, which means it mostly doesn't matter. In here is a slightly different story. It's still 2.5 inches, but the floor pan for the trunk ends up in here. So at a minimum, this section right here, we want to leave at least 1 inch for a flange. So in the end, we'll bend it along that dotted line right there, but we'll cut it 1 inch inboard. Fun job, right? Not so much. Well, that is, I think, the worst of it. What I have left to do now is some cleanup, pulling out little pieces like this. I need to get the seams pulled off and taken apart, finalize this and dress it up a little bit. The frame actually has to get notched or carved in by about 1 inch to make room for the mini tub. The nasty part is getting that old wheel housing out, so I'm feeling pretty good just to have it out of there. I thought about replacing that whole panel, and I could, but it's really just bad right here, not surprisingly, at the base of the wheel well. So I'm going to cut this out, weld a new one in, and that really only leaves this much to remove. Let's do a little bit of a test fit. I don't expect it to go in very well yet. The whole thing needs to rotate that way, so we need to cut more of the floor out up there. Well, I think I've got this cut really close now. I need to do some fine-tuning cuts right around the frame rail, and I need to build the filler piece to go in here. Same with this section, a little bit of fine-tuning and a filler piece. These units are outfitted with locator pins or dowels, and I have a couple that I can reference right now. The one on the inside of the car right here for this one, and then there's one you can't see, but it's hidden right up in here. The reference is that one. They're a good reference point to make sure that the wheel housing is rotated at least roughly where it should be. Not bad, right? Well, that corner panel is on. Everything is clamped or screwed into place. There's no welds in place yet, but it's in there and it looks pretty dang good. So now, am I due for 2 miracles? Let's put this door on here and see how well it lines up. That one doesn't quite deserve miracle status, sorry to say. It's not bad though. The gap is a little big, not huge. It's fairly symmetrical, so that helps. there's a little bit of a funny twist here, and it might be the door's fault, and maybe even could be adjusted with the hinges, I don't know. But it's slightly inboard of flush here and then outboard of flush here. The door is slightly out from the rocker panel, slightly in from the rocker panel there. So nowhere near as clean as the last one, but not bad. The wheel housing is completely welded in, and I've treated the rust with a 415 metal prep. Now what I'm going to do is hit it with an epoxy primer. It's on there. It looks even better than it did the first time. The last thing I want to do before I put a weld on it is check the fitment on the trunk. At that point, I think I can just weld it up. Well, I wish I had better news. This is going to require some finessing back here, and I'm not exactly sure how. But the fitment on this side is just not very good. I noticed when I first put it together that the quarter panel sticks out beyond the tail panel quite a little bit right here. I tried not to read too much into that because I don't know if the tail panel is straight, but admittedly it caused a little bit of angst. Well, now look what's going on. I put the trunk lid on, and not only do I have a massive gap, I mean, that's a 3/4 inch gap right there, but it confirms that the quarter panel is too long back here, which is kind of interesting because it lines up everywhere else, but not right there. No welding today. The good news is I think everything else looks good. The door gap is even pretty solid. The joint up there at the roof I think will be good. Everything lines up around the wheel housing, so I'm pretty happy overall, but this is going to take some finesse. So that's going to do it for now. I'm going to have to think about how to handle that. Remember that whole 1 hour of work, 10 hours of thinking and studying and planning? I'm back to a 10-hour block. So, hey, I'm happy. A solid miracle and a manageable situation, coupled with a little bit of work. We're making progress. I'll catch you on the next one.